Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of International Bipolar Foundation, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Manuel Sanchez de Carmona. Dr. Sanchez de Carmona was born in Mexico City and graduated from the Anahuac University School of Medicine, Mexico. He did his internship year at the Jackson Memorial Hospital, Miami, University School of Medicine. He qualified as a specialist in psychiatry at Mexico's National Institute of Psychiatry, Ramon de la Fuente, in conjunction with the Mental Health Department of the Autonomous National Mexican University. Dr. Sanchez de Carmona began his clinical work with bipolar disorders 20 years ago. He has participated in various clinical and educational programs for his colleagues, bipolar patients, and their families. He founded 8 years ago ISBD Mexico, the Mexican chapter of the International Society for Bipolar Disorders. Currently, Dr. Sanchez de Carmona is the president of the International Society for Bipolar Disorders. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for your nice presentation. It's a big honor to be with all of you. And I also want to thank Muffy Walker for the opportunity of talking to all of you. I love IBPF. I've been following this society for some years, and I'm pretty excited to be with all of you. I think it's quite an honor to share this space. I understand that I have 45 minutes, and then we have 15 minutes for Q&A, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I will begin. So you just saw the logo of a current WBD, that's the World Bipolar Day. And my title today, the current topics, what do you need to know about bipolar disorder? I want to bring to all of you current information, things that we believe in the ISBD that you should know. And I will try to make it as very clear and enjoyable for all of you. First of all, I am pleased to be, as you heard, the president of the ISBD, that the International Society for Bipolar Disorders. A little bit of history about this society. This was founded 16 years ago by Dr. David Koffler and Sam Gershon. That's in Pittsburgh. And there you can see our board of governance. I'm the actual president. Our office is in Pittsburgh in the United States. And we have, this is all the whole organization chart we have now, and I brought this to give you an idea of the globality of the society. Our main goal is to educate, to do research, to hold meetings, to give to the doctors, to the physicians worldwide, to patients, to families, to advocacies, to caregivers, scientific information regarding the bipolar disorders world. I am very happy to tell you that we have chapters, local chapters that work as independently, but we also form this huge society in which every one of those countries, here you can see the chapters from Latin America, the chapters from Europe, the chapters from Asia, and the ones from Australia and New Zealand, the Australasian chapters. These chapters have the same goals, which is basically unite doctors in their countries. Most of these chapters hold meetings regarding bipolar disorders, and of course work with the advocacies and with the patient groups in their respective countries. The ISBD is currently working a lot of things. This is our journal, the Bipolar Disorders Journal, which is currently a leading force in literature, scientific literature regarding bipolar disorders. The 5-year impact factor that we have is 5.4, which is very high and good. We're in the ranking of 20 for 251 peer-reviewed psychiatric journals. And this is quite an achievement because we are the first one of a specific topic. The other 19 are journals of general psychiatry. And here you can feel the impact that the ISBD has had in the last 15 years, and I am very proud to be part of this group. Here I'm showing you our image of our next meeting that will be happening in Toronto June 3 to 6, 2015. And I'm telling you this because we're going to have a very interesting track covering patients and caregivers. That's going to be called Experts by Experience. And we'll have a lot of interesting topics and activities for the patient, for the caregivers, and the advocacy groups. So this is what is coming. This is what we just did, and I'm very proud to say that this concept WBD, World Bipolar Day, was done in conjunction with IBPF and with the Asian Network of Bipolar Disorders. Here you see our logo, which actually you can see our logo symbolizes a person with its open arms, and this globe that is degraded between red and blue symbolizes that bipolar is more now conceived like a mixed state rather than the two poles, mania and depression. Here you can see the different products that were made for this to celebrate this day. And of course, we're going to continue going with this effort every March 30th to celebrate WBD, World Bipolar Day. Our logo has been translated to 11 languages, and here you see the different names of the societies and groups worldwide that are working with us. Let's make a difference. I want to get involved, all of you, and it's great. We did a great impact last March 30th, and we're looking forward to the next one. So here's the logo, and I have to tell you that WBD is happening every March 30th because of a very specific reason, and that is Vincent Van Gogh. Vincent Van Gogh was born March 30th, that's his birthday, and as you know, he is a very, very famous, well-known painter that suffered from bipolar disorder. Scientists and researchers, historians now, can easily relate many of his constant mood changes and temper problems to what now we call bipolar disorder. Here you see many of the very famous paintings that Vincent Van Gogh did. And he didn't only painted all these sceneries from the northern part of France. He also painted hospitals, mental hospitals, in which he spent a lot of time of his life. He only lived 37 years, and during those 37 years, he had numerous cycles of hypomania and depression, together with alcohol and substance abuse, with all the solvents and the oleum on the painting substances that he used. Here you see Dr. Ray. He was one of his doctors during that day, and you can see that by then he was described of suffering from some variation of epilepsy. The hallucinations are clearly described, and here you see an image of one of the many clinics. This is the one in Arles and in Saint-Remy de Provence. Here, Dr. Urpar, which was his doctor, was the first one to say that he suffered from 6 months of acute delusional mania, especially following the infamous episode in which he cut his earlobe. Dr. Gachet was probably the most close doctor that he had through the years. Dr. Gachet worked in the hospital of Auvers, and he was a very good friend of Vincent. He said, kind of protecting him, that he only suffered for an acute case of sun intoxication with a case of turpentine, one of the solvents that he used for his paintings. Van Gogh is very well known because of this intensity that you see in his paintings, his color, his very bright images that really take you along with his mood during those days. But we also have paintings from the same landscape, but in these tones, gray, blue, very depressive colors. And it's interesting to see a painter with the same landscape, but in a different mood. This is one of his most famous paintings that he did it in the window of his hospital, of the hospital in which he was admitted after he took off his earlobe. Van Gogh was a very well-known painter by then, even though he didn't make any money from his paintings, when he met Paul Gauguin. Paul Gauguin, also a patient who has been related to bipolar disorders, met him just for actually 9 weeks. And in less than 3 months, they develop a very interesting relationship in which paintings like this tell the story. In the left, you can see that's a Van Gogh chair in which Gauguin was sitting in his studio. And in the other one, in the right side, you see a Gauguin painting Vincent Van Gogh. But probably the most famous painting of that time is this one. This is Gauguin, in which he's painting Van Gogh making his very famous sunflower painting. So what is interesting about this relationship, the friendship, there's a lot of stories about the intensity and the constant fights that they had. Historians now tell us that December 23rd, 1888, Gauguin was fighting with Van Gogh. Gauguin had a knife in his hand. During the fight, Van Gogh takes the knife away from Gauguin's hands and he mutilates his ear. Gauguin, very scared about all this story, runs away and never sees Van Gogh again. It's interesting to see this very intense personalities now related to bipolar disorder, that they share so many traits. This is a fascinating table in which you can see, this is from the K. Jemisin book, Touch with Fire, and here you see how interesting it is to review the productivity of Vincent van Gogh. You may see that in June, July, in the summer, he did almost 250 paintings and drawings as average, which is an amazing, a huge number of work. Of course, you can say that summer in France is probably the best weather to paint, but there hasn't been any painter in history as talented as him to have like this cycles of his work. Some historians may relate this changes in productivity to his mood cycles. This is one of the last paintings of Vincent Van Gogh. It's a very interesting painting because it's not familiar for Van Gogh to see black crowds. His biographers now say that maybe if he was sending a message through this pathway that loses in the horizon, and that probably he was saying goodbye. Just weeks after he painted this, he committed suicide. This is a very sad note in the newspaper, on Le Corps.Sen, that says that in Sunday, 27th of July, 1890, Van Gogh, 37-year-old Van Gogh, shot himself with a gunshot, with a rifle. Sorry. Gachet, his doctor, was the one who saw him die. He was actually in the same forest. He ran to try to do something and save Van Gogh's life, but it was useless. He died the next day in Gachet's home. Vincent van Gogh is an example of productivity, talent, grandiosity, and also about this very sad mood cycles that unfortunately may take the life of patients who suffer from this kind of illness. 40% of the cases are never diagnosed properly. Still nowadays, 25% of the non-treated bipolar patient, depressed patients specifically, commits suicide. These are very serious numbers that I'm showing you today, and we question ourselves, what are we doing wrong? What can we do to improve the diagnosis? What can we make to make the diagnosis earlier? These are many of the points and questions that we have in ISBD, and most of the physicians usually we ask ourselves, how can we do better? Here's a graph that I use with my patients to explain the differences between unipolar and bipolar disorder. As you may see, the line that divides unipolar from bipolar, actually nowadays, it's like faded. It's not so clear that there are two disorders totally separate. And you may see in the same family people who suffer from unipolar and bipolar. When I'm going with this idea is to telling you that now we consider that mood disorders are basically all related, and that when you have someone with unipolar disorder, you have to be very careful to look in other members of the family if there's any sign of unipolar or bipolar disorder. Same for the other side. So here you see the main bipolar types: bipolar 1, as you know, manic depressive illness, known as before; bipolar 2, which is hypomania with depressive states; and what some doctors call bipolar spectrum, which is a genetically group of disorders related more to bipolar rather than to unipolar, but never with a hypomania or manic episode. However, they are considered more in the bipolar side because they respond better to treatment that is frequently given to bipolar patients. Here's the whole spectrum of the disorder, and this is a table by Jules Angst, and was usually used to make the new criteria for the DSM-5. And here you see the higher you see the disorders, the more severe it's the illness. You see the major depressive disorder, bipolar 2, bipolar 1. Capital letters means the predominant symptoms. So you see here are the big depressive episode, a full mania, or the bipolar 1 mania with depression, or depression with hypomania in bipolar 2. But when I decrease the severity of the illness, you see these different entities in which we have that disorder, but in less severe degree. These three ones, dysthymia, cyclothymic disorder, and hypomania with very few symptoms, are usually underdiagnosed. And many of these people, sometimes they are treated with the incorrect medications, and a severe cycle may be provoked due to the ignorance that they were suffering from this kind of softer illness, let's say, quote unquote. So now we're talking about this. How can I know if I have a depressive episode? How can I know that probably it's not a unipolar disorder and rather a bipolar? So these are indicators that actually help us a lot to differentiate one group from the other. And I put the stop sign here because I want physicians and also patients and family members to stop and consider these different issues before taking any kind of medication. We have here that substance abuse is very much related more with bipolar than unipolar disorder. A family history is more frequent in bipolar. Also, the first episode, as we know, is very much frequent in bipolar disorder rather than unipolar. Bipolar should be perceived as a youth disorder. It begins in the early years. Now we know it's quite earlier than we thought 10 or 15 years ago. So now we're going very low in almost the adolescence of the, or in even between the 5 and 10 years old. Postpartum mood disorders are more related to bipolar. Actually, postpartum depression can be almost considered synonymous with bipolar disorder. Psychotic symptoms before 35 years old is also a predictive episode. Let's say if you have a mood disorder, the depressive state with psychotic symptoms, that also raise the bar about having bipolar disorder. Atypical features: on-off switch means about this depressive, quote-unquote, depressive patients that miraculously do better with antidepressants, and actually they are switching to the other side, to hypomania or mania. So these patients will make with that magically improve with the first dosage of antidepressants going to actually be bipolars. And then this is about frequency. When we have more than 3 episodes of mood disorders and brief depressive phases, those two are very suggestive of bipolar. And they're actually talking about a cycling disorder that goes on and on. So these are the indicators that can give us some light about the disorder. Also, it's interesting to see the differences, the clinical differences between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And in this table, Judd actually is showing us that bipolar disorders 2 are actually more serious than bipolar disorder 1 because they spend less time asymptomatic. Only 46% of their life are without symptoms. This is very relevant because there's an underdiagnosis worldwide about bipolar 2, and usually it is wrongly perceived like the soft type of bipolar, which is totally the other way because you see it's 50% more symptoms of depression. And actually, in this table, you're going to see the difference between the depressive symptoms between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, and the difference is very interesting. You see, in bipolar 1, we have a relationship, a ratio of 3 or 4 times more frequent the depressive symptoms than mania. But when we're talking about bipolar 2, there's a huge difference here. It's almost 37 times more frequent, the depressive state, rather than mania. So here's also another interesting thing that needs further research. Bipolar 2 patients spend very little time of their life hypomanic or with mixed features. And we need to learn to diagnose the disorder from the depressive state. And we are working very hard to improve those data. Going back to history, I want to tell you all these different aspects about the Paul Gauguin's life. And I want to make this story go ahead with Gauguin's life, because sometimes we have to use other things to make the proper diagnosis rather than just symptoms. We doctors, and you can actually help us to make a review of your life and see for different cues that can give you more light about the disorder. Gauguin was born in France, but when he was very young, his mother went to Lima, Peru. She was Peruvian, and Gauguin spent the first 7 years of his life in Peru. Then he returned to Paris when he was 18 years old, and as a very young, intense, probably having symptoms by then, he joined the Navy, the French Navy, and as a young sailor, he did twice traveling worldwide. He did traveling around the world for 2 times when he was only 20 years old. He then became a stock market businessman, a very young man, and he made a lot of money. He became one of the richest men in France by then. He had a very interesting art collection. However, he was not painting by then, and as very frequent in some patients with the disorder, the symptoms are so extreme that he went to bankruptcy, and he spent all his money in different businesses that they never saw the light. By then, he was married, and he had 5 children. He married a Danish girl. When he cycled in this time and he had this bankruptcy and all his life was upside down, he left his wife in Denmark with his children, and he went to begin his painting career in Arles, in the northern part of France. Here is where he meets Van Gogh, and as I told you, he's related somehow to the infamous incident of Van Gogh's earlobe. So when this happens, he decides to move from Arles to Tahiti. And just to see how erratic his life was, he decides to go back to Copenhagen just to check up on his wife. These are some of the paintings from that era, and you can see the color, all his traits, the sexuality in his paintings. And as frequently happens with people with this disorder undiagnosed, you see traveling like this. Can you imagine in that time going from Tahiti to Copenhagen just to check up on your wife? He just spent 3 days with his wife, and then he returned back to the Marquesas Islands. So when you have someone with this intensity, with this traveling, change of professions, all these different stories. These are things that sometimes can help a lot better physician to make the diagnosis. This is one of the last paintings of Gauguin, in which he's reflecting upon his life. And the point that I'm making here is that sometimes in psychiatry, you need all the story of a person, you know, to read about his life, to understand his work, all his personal data, all his personal information are very useful to know his disorder. So that is something that we do every day in our practice to understand how this disorder is moving. Nowadays, to make the disorder, you have to focus on two things. First of all, of course, symptoms. And here is one of the biggest changes of the DSM-5. As you know before, we had the idea of a manic episode in the right and a depressive episode in the left. And the DSM-4 was talking about mixed episode, in which we had 4 symptoms of depression and 4 symptoms of mania. Now the DSM-5 is opening this bracket this way, so you have now a depressive episode with hypomania or manic symptoms, or the other way, a manic episode with the depressive symptoms. This is the new DSM-5, and this is the new mixed episode. To make this clear, more clear, let me show this story in which a patient is coming with this depressive symptoms. But if you make a careful clinical history, you're going to see that at the same time he or she is having manic symptoms. So in this case, he has a depressive episode with hypomanic features. Here it's a bipolar type 2 disorder in a depressive episode with hypomanic features. Before DSM-4 times, we were trying to make the diagnosis as a mixed episode. But it didn't fit it because it has only 3 manic symptoms. So here you see the benefit of the new nomenclature in the DSM-5. We're opening more the scope of mixed symptoms. Why? Because they are very frequent. And the patient that I just saw you, that he has mixed features of depression plus hypomania, is one of the most suicidal patients. So this is good for us to try to predict the risks. This is the other scope of the window, a patient that comes to the ward with a manic phase. But if we review closely, we're going to see that she has bipolar 1 disorder in a manic episode. With why the diagnosis is, and second, the medication that is chosen. It's been seen that patients, for example, in the other side, depressive patients with hypomanic features are the ones who are more in risk of committing suicide. And therefore, we have to be very careful with the medications that we are giving them. Here you're seeing some beautiful images of the England, of the British countryside, in which Virginia Woolf lived. As you know, she's one of the most famous female writers of her time. She's very well known for the Bloomsbury Group and all the literature that she wrote regarding women's studies, and also she did great novels and a lot of letters. And in this day, I'm going to share with you one of her most famous letters, and it's fascinating because she had bipolar disorder. She didn't know that that was the name of the illness that she had, but it's amazing how clear is her thinking and how well she describes all of her symptoms. Here you can see clearly the manic symptoms and how she describes them as a manic phase in which mania explodes, and she has this is how mania explodes, and how she feels mania as an extreme explosion of fireworks, and as an experience, she says how mania is terrific. In the other way, she talks here about how the depressive symptoms are more than 3 months, just 6 months, in which she's almost crippled, lying in bed. I have a problem here with my slide. Let me just, sorry, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Here it goes. So here you may see these highlighted things are about the symptoms that are very clearly described. Which is beautiful about this slide is that she wrote this in 1914, way before we knew a lot about the things, and of course there was not proper treatment by then. And it's very impressive to see how accurate was her description of her symptoms. These are the writings from her husband, Leonard Wolf. In 1916, he was talking about this manic episode, and she was talking for almost 2 or 3 days without stopping, paying no attention to no one. Here's her house, and actually it's a museum nowadays. And this is a very common image of Virginia Woolf depressed. And you can see here a painting done by her sister covering those days. Her suicidal note is a very sad note, and it's also a letter expressing her love and care for her husband. Here you see that she's certain that she's feeling voices again, hearing voices again, and it's actually a suicide note in which she's telling that the reason that she's killing herself, of course she's in a depressive state, but she's saying that she cannot bear another cycle and that she cannot go on spoiling Leonard's life anymore. It's very poetic in the way that she says thank you to him, and there is a very sensible letter that clearly let us know how aware someone is about all the love and commitment that many of the caregivers show the persons with this disorder. Now, as a doctor, when I read this letter, I feel very, very inspired to go on with my work, and we need to do as a community, doctors, patients, and caregivers, to be united and to fight to stop these things going on. And Virginia Woolf is an example of a person who suffered very deeply from the cycles, and it's clear how she was desperate to find an exit, a medication that can help her. Nowadays, we know that even though all the science, bipolar disorder is still a burden of a disease to the population. Healthy life, we know, is reduced by 12 years. Working life is also reduced by 14 years. Many patients with bipolar disorders either lose their job because they stop going in a depressive state, or in mania they may do something very serious. Life expectancy is reduced by 9 years. Employment, unemployment, and other employment problems happen twice as common and divorce and separation is also twice as common. These are very important, hard facts that motivate us to work harder and to make WBD, World Bipolar Day, such an important day for all of us. This is a way in which the concept of burden of disease is conceived for a psychiatric illness. Symptoms, cognition, stigma, comorbidity, social, economic issues, and treatment, all of them constitute the globality of the concept that the burden of disease implies. But this is the way that it should be, and this is the way that it is. As you may see, stigma is by far the biggest slice of this cake. You can see that we still have to fight about the stigma that people have for this disorder, and that's one of the main goals. I'm going to show you, to conclude, this psychosocial the approach that we're doing now in Mexico, and it has different parts. The first part is the individual part and the family part. When we talk about families, in this actually slide that I show my patients and the caregivers, this is Hemingway, and it's interesting to review Ernest Hemingway's family chart. This helps a lot to understand how important it is to view a family and to understand the inheritance of the disorder. Here you see Clarence Hemingway, who was a doctor and was Hemingway's father, and all of the family, Marceline, Ernest, Ursula, Madeleine, Carla, and Leicester. Ernest married 3 times. Here you see his, 4 times, his 4 wives, and his 3 sons, and the granddaughters. Of all this clan, you can see that all of them had bipolar disorder. Clarence, his father, Ernest himself, his sister Ursula, his sister Leicester, his brother, Leicester, his son Gregory, and his granddaughter Margot. And of this group, 5 of them committed suicide, unfortunately. Here is a way of showing all of you and the audience, the patients, and the family members how important it is to make a familiar history and to always have in mind that some cases like this one, there's inheritance about it. We're not 100% decisive of which are the genes, the conclusive genes that carry the information of bipolar disorder. But here you see in the slide that green is showing us that the long arm of the chromosome 12 is clearly related to unipolar and bipolar disorders. This is the future. Nowadays, you cannot make a diagnosis of bipolar disorder using genes, but in the future, this is one of the areas that we're looking forward to have news, and it's going to be very good for the field to make the diagnosis this way. So I was telling you that when we have a patient, we try first to make an individual approach, a familial and a community one. Let me show you part of the material that we have to work with the patient and with a caregiver. This is an example of the life charting that we do. In this graph, the patient symbolizes the depressive and the manic phases. And in this exercise that we do with the patient and with the family, the patient has to write down, as you see, the different issues that happen in their life, pregnancy, any kind of losses. Here is the other one. This is a thermometer that we use to symbolize the intensity of the symptoms. And this is a way in which we grade how manic in this side or how depressive is a patient. And you may see here that we have these guidelines to teach the patient and the family caregiver what to do. You can download this in our website, isdmexico.org. And here you can see how we work in the clinic, how a patient grades its symptoms going up or going down. And this is an example that I brought you of a diary, and of course, this material, I had the approval of the patients to share it with all of you. Here you see, this is a 16-year-old, and you can see how her symptoms are getting stronger every day. And here, retrospectively, teaching her, I'm teaching her how her symptoms are gaining every day more force. The day that she was admitted to the hospital, she was, of course, in +5 in September. And the idea here is to teach them how important it is for them to look for help in April and May, in the early stages, as you may see, when she's in +2 or +3. Definitely the difference and the outcome is a lot better if we treat this patient in those early stages rather in the last ones. And here you see, this is an 8-month difference between one letter and the other one. It's the same person. He was perfectly normal in 2003 in June, and this is in early spring. You see he's in +5. He's very, very manic. This is a very sad story because this is a letter from the person that we call in Mexico JJ. JJ are the initials of a young man, 23-year-old man, that committed suicide after this huge mixed manic phase. And what is very moving of this story after JJ is that their family is working, they are working with us in ISBD, Mexico, and they're making a donation every year so we can send a young doctor, a Mexican doctor, young doctor to train with that funds to the U.S. to specialize in bipolar disorder. So this is part of the material that we use in this course. The name of the course is Bipolar Connection, and is done almost 2 times a year in different parts of Mexico. And it's a presentation that has like 4 blocks. Here you may see them. and we train the patient and the family about the main facts of the disorder, about the classification and the symptoms, now the DSM-5 data, about life charting and the exercises you just saw, and about the treatment, the main treatments that we have in our country. And this is an idea to show you what we're doing. To finish up this, I want to share with you this story about an actual painter. He is Miguel. He's an actual Mexican painting, and I have the honor to be his doctor. And you can see here, this is some images of him very young, 5-year-old, and here's an image that he took from himself in a manic phase. He's an artist, and he made this installation about his disorder. Here you can see one of his latest paintings. And here's his life chart. And what we did in the clinic is to relate his manic or depressive symptoms to his paintings. So here you see this first manic phase in which I met him, and you can see this examples of his manic symptoms. You can see the huge color, the traits, all of the color graphic elements that you see in his manic episode. Here goes an example of the paintings he did in the depressive state. You can see the blues, the blacks. Here's an example of his mixed episode, of another manic phase. Look at the colors, the intensity that you can see in his face, in his gaze. And here you see a mixed episode represented with this group of paintings, in which actually you see people in a rave and dancing, but if you look closely, you're going to find people that are staring to the viewer, to the camera, but they are not pictures; they are paintings. And he says that he was him feeling that way, that he was surrounded by people, feeling manic, but at the same time very, very sad and lonely. And this is a series of self-portraits that I love. And I have one in particular in which is my favorite, and this one. And it's my favorite because of the technique. It is done by pulverizing valproate. He actually pulverized his medication to make his portrait. And I find it so powerful because this is something that every patient must do in order to accept his illness, their illness. You know, they need to understand that they need the medication to become a healthy self. So I find this one very powerful because he communicates us how difficult it was for him, as for many patients, to understand how relevant and how important it is to take your medication. I also have this couple of two more favorites because they were visionary. They were done 15 years ago, and you see a manic phase that is blue and a red depressive phase. And he was kind of predicting this idea that now we have so current about mixed symptoms. And I like it because this kind of makes broader our view how complicated the symptoms can be, and we have to stop thinking of the disorder of the two poles. So this is a summary about the main things that we have to do. And this is a table that I usually like to teach my residents and my students how important it is to have on mind that you have to follow these rules in order to give a good treatment. In the first 15 days of treatment, you make the diagnosis, you have managing acutely all the symptoms, and you are going to select the medications. Those are the first 15 days. Then, in the next 15 weeks, you evaluate the response to the treatment. There's a lot of changes with the medications and the collaterals, and you follow up with 15 months of teaching, of maintenance, of psychoeducation. And here it says 15 years just to follow the rule of the 15. But the idea is to give a quality of life. And here the goal of this table is to teach people and the patients that you don't have to see this as a disorder that's going to be treated in 15 days. you need to make decisions in those 15 days that they are going to affect a lifetime. So you have to be very careful to choose your doctor, to have proper guidance about the medications that you're taking, and to be very careful to evaluate all the symptoms in this approach, in a lifetime approach, always having the best quality of life possible. So this is a summary of what I'm teaching daily to the patients and in our Mexican clinic and in every program that we have in which we meet patients and family members. We have to keep in mind that this is a disorder that is not only making famous people, Hemingway, Van Gogh, Gauguin, Virginia Woolf. It also affects a huge number of people worldwide, and normal people, even though bipolar is related to very famous and talented people, there are normal people as you and me that may suffer from the disorder. Millions of people suffer from the disorder. Millions of people are at risk, and we have to do something and reach out. So it's so important to diagnose this on time and to give them the proper treatment. So I'm finalizing this by sending you this message from the ISBD and about for the WBD, for the World Bipolar Day next year, that we would love to have you collaborate with us and to see us as a society that we're doing a lot of research and helping you to get better treatment and better diagnosis. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions. Debbie?
Great. Thank you very much for your talk. It's very, very informative. And as Dr. Sanchez de Carmona had offered his time to answer your questions. So let's see. Okay. First question. How often or frequent do you change the medicine to control the symptoms? Is it possible to use the same medication for a long time and maintain effectiveness?
Thank you, Debbie. It's a very good question, and I have to answer very carefully because you have to keep in mind that it changes between case to case. But I can tell you that we prefer to stay on the same medication. Let's say the mood stabilizers, the typical ones, lithium, valproate, quetiapine also. So we try to stay with a main, let's say, like a backbone drug, you know, like it's the main medication. And depending on the crisis, we may add or increase the other ones. But I can say that the goal is to stay with the medication the longest as possible and not to make many changes. A risk if you make a lot of changes in the medication pattern that you increase the risk of relapses.
Great, thank you. The next question. Accepting the medication is indeed very challenging for the patient. They're in and out of acceptance of the illness. How do we as a family support or help them accept the diagnosis? Any suggestions?
First of all, you have to always have in mind how difficult it is to accept this. And you shouldn't take it for granted, never, never. It's a very serious thing to realize that you have an illness that is going to be in your life forever. So that's the first point. Always be emphatic, have empathy with the patient. The second point is that you have to make your point that the medication has a very clear goal, which is improving the quality of your life. By preventing relapse, by preventing relapses in the patients, you can achieve a very good quality of life. That is the way that you should give medication, offering hope. Because there is a great and a clear and a truth that you're going to get better and that you can manage a normal life, a very happy and stable life with the medication, with the hand of the medication and all of the education, as you know. So here's my point here, that always when you advise to take a medication, you should send a message of hope and that the medication is going to improve the quality of your life. And that is the ultimate goal. And when you make a decision of taking a new drug or changing doctors, you have to keep in mind that the goal, the ultimate goal, is to have a good quality of life. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question is, how do you integrate the family in the process when someone is newly diagnosed?
Well, there are two things very relevant here. First of all, you need to get involved the family, because the family, as we know and you just saw on my slides, the family can be affected also. It's very, very common that there's not only one person with a disorder. So the first point is that we need to make a family history in order to make sure the patient is the only one with the illness. So let's imagine that in this case, he's the only one or she is the only one. In that case, it's so relevant to talk with the family, because sometimes the family or the loved ones are the first ones to notice the first symptoms of any kind of relapse. So it's so relevant for them to understand and to learn the different signs and triggers, because every patient may have its particular triggers. So you have to train not only the patient, but also the family. The family is relevant to help us to understand the illness and also to make a team. You need to make a team with the family, with the patient, with the doctor, with the caregivers. It's so important to work as a team. And the more people, the more loving people that you involve in all this team that is going to help the patient, the more successful that you probably are going to be. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that answer. Next question. If a patient is diagnosed in adolescence, does chronological age and brain development that come with age contribute to stabilization?
Sorry, can you tell me again?
So
if the patient is diagnosed in adolescence?
In adolescence, right? Does, in time with age and brain development, does that contribute to stabilization?
This is a very interesting question, because I've seen in my career both sides of the story. There are described patients who are very, very ill in adolescence very early, and at the end, early intervention actually helps them a lot, and they can achieve a meaningful and very satisfying life when they're in their 40s, you know? So I cannot tell you as a rule that every patient that is going to begin with very severe symptoms in adolescence is actually going to do very, very poorly. But I have to tell you that yes, the question is telling me if the disorder begins to have very acute phases in the early stages of adolescence in which the brain hasn't developed fully, this has been shown to have some cognitive damages that have to be worked lately. You know, you have to remember that the adolescence is a phase in which the person learns many issues, not only facts, school facts, but also life issues. So when you have this disorder that is keeping the adolescent cycling from one side to the other one, the person loses the opportunity to learn about coping mechanisms and about coping things that you need to learn when you're young. So there's a particular care that needs to be done with this kind of patients. Also, I have to tell you this. When the disorder hits the person in the big first crisis, when he is single, it's totally different when he's married, you know, because when he or she is single, it's going to be tougher for them to go on with their life. And very sadly, many of these people have to really struggle to have a partner in their life. When the disorder hits someone who is already married, they already have a structure to help them, you know. So these are different issues that we have to consider when we treat young people. But I want to end this question giving a message of hope, that here the key feature is to treat as soon as possible. And it's a certified thing that we say that the sooner you treat the cycles, the better the prognosis is going to be. And this is for sure a proven fact.
Great, thank you. The next question, how do you deal with substance abuse, whether it is alcohol or marijuana, when you're dealing with a loved one who is accepting of their medication and their illness, but they still want to smoke marijuana and drink alcohol?
Okay, excellent question, Debbie. And I have to tell you that sadly, it's a very, very common issue. As you know, substance abuse is very common in the bipolar patient, and alcohol and cocaine more than marijuana, because patients usually look for stimulants, for something to make you feel as you felt when you were manic, rather than marijuana. But both are very frequent also in patients. So here you have to realize that there's a big risk of beginning a cycle with alcohol abuse, with an alcoholic binge or a cocaine or a methamphetamine binge. You can end up having a very severe manic episode. Marijuana is also a very difficult drug, a very dangerous drug that can actually interfere in the work of many of the medications. So it shouldn't be perceived as a very noble, quote-unquote, drug. It can be very difficult for some of the patients to have a good pharmacological response if they're doing marijuana and alcohol at the same time. So here, what my advice is that we always have to keep in mind that we have to give treatment to these issues. It is very common that the whole team focuses on the mood symptoms and they don't pay so much attention to the alcohol or the caffeine intake that the patient is taking. And I'm saying also caffeine because, as you may know, any kind of stimulant can be very difficult to handle in bipolar disorders. So my advice here is that you should always treat both. And we have to be very careful because the prognosis and decreases with the comorbid diagnosis of alcohol, substance abuse, or dependence. And of course, medications don't work as correctly with the substances. So for me, this is a key factor when you're dealing with these two issues. You know, you cannot ignore this issue, and please be very strict and very careful with substances, especially alcohol and stimulants.
Great, thank you. Is suicide does that always occur in the depression stage?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Does suicide always occur during the depression stage?
Fortunately, no. I can tell you that mostly more of let's say it this way, it's not as frequent as you may think, so I'm very happy to tell you that you can have a depressive phase without the suicidal thoughts. However, it is a common feature. It's not as frequent, but you can have it. So let me tell you that we have to be very careful, and it's so serious that as a rule of thumb, every day I see a depressive patient, I look for suicidality. I know that for some it may sound like I'm exaggerating, but this is the way that it should be because it's a life-threatening thing, as you know. So you can say that suicidality is more frequent in bipolar 2 disorder. That's what we found. And also with episodes that you have mixed symptoms. As you know, patients with depressive symptoms plus hypomanic symptoms, the hypomania can actually give you the energy to have the act committed. So there's a potential suicide threat in every unstable patient that you have to review closely. Also, I have to tell you that in some episodes in which the patient is depressive and has suicidal thoughts, and you cure the patient from that cycle and now it's stable, if the patient relapses, the ideas that he had before of committing suicide may come back again. And this is a very important point that I want to make, that once a person already had an attempt, the probability of having another one is very high. So you have to take in special consideration every patient who had already become suicidal once, because there's a probability if they have a serious relapse, they may do have the symptoms again.
Great, thank you. If a patient stays on their medication, what is the rate of relapse?
Let's suppose that I'm assuming that he's stable and that he or she is stable and that they're taking the medication properly. It's very hard to tell the rate of relapse because the most important factor that relates to this is not the medication per se, but the severity of the illness. You have to remember that I'm not talking of one specific kind of illness. There are very different degrees of the disorder and types of the disorder. But I can tell you that the rate of relapse is significantly, very significantly lower, more than 70–80% low. They're going to remain stable. And let's say this, if those patients, treated patients, do have some symptoms, the intensity of the relapse is going to be way lower if they're taking their medication. So overall, at the end of the day, the medication is always going to help. Even though you may experience some kind of turbulence, some kind of mood changes, medication is going to be great for you because it's going to make you to have less symptoms. And if you have a relapse, it's going to be shorter if you're under medication.
Excellent, thank you. What is the youngest a patient can be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and what if there is a family history?
Well, that's a very tough one because there's a controversy now in the world regarding this topic. DSM-5 has this new diagnosis that is called Disruptive Dysregulating Mood Disorder, which for me and for researchers actually is like the early signs of bipolar disorder. And you can begin to diagnose as young as 5-year-old. Between 5 and 10 years old is what DSM-5 tells you can make the diagnosis now. Very careful for me to say here, this is not bipolar disorder talking DSM-5 language. However, if these young kids do have the symptoms and they are siblings or they belong to a family where other members do have the disorder, these are kids that have to be taken care of very carefully because there's a potential of them of having the disorder. And I'm telling you this because some antidepressants should not be used in young kids, especially if they have this high risk profile of becoming bipolar, because they may have the disorder, let's say, in a latent phase in their genes, and the antidepressant may push the symptoms up so they can change from the depressive state to a manic phase. So very, very young. The ideal is to make the disorder as soon as possible. I can tell you that most of the centers in the world, they are working with adolescents and with young kids, 10-year-old, 12-year-old kids. And we can say that the results of treating early the disorder are very promising regarding prognosis and outcome in the future.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay.
How do you distinguish the difference between borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder?
Well, I can tell you that it's very difficult to distinguish them, both of them, but sometimes you can even have both, You can have a borderline personality disorder that suffers also from bipolar disorder. So you cannot tell it's either one or the other one. You can actually have both. But I can tell you easily a very distinctive feature between them. Bipolar disorder is a mood cycle disorder. And it has cycles. So you see the patient in different, let's say, quote-unquote versions. You see the patient has a depressive state, euthymia, or mania. So it's not always the same, it's not always in the same mood. A personality disorder, borderline personality, does not have cycles. It or him or she has a permanent state of personality in which the symptoms are always present. And also, there is a difference of the symptoms. Borderline personality talks more about a way to relate to others. For example, the way that people love each other. When you have someone with borderline personality, they alternate from idealization or devaluation of the same person. So I'm going that borderline is more related to the loved ones, to the way that you relate socially, to your work, to the people you love, to the way that you deal your normal life. And that's more a personality issue. It's always permanent. Bipolar disorder, on the other hand, it's a total cycling thing. You have different moments in your life in which you may become manic or depressive, but definitely you have a stable state in which you don't have any kind of symptoms. And regarding the issues about socializing and the way that you love people in bipolar disorder is the same as people without any kind of disorder. So that's, let's say, like the main differences.
Great, thank you. Do you have time for a couple additional questions?
Let's just have, let's do two more, please.
Okay, perfect. How do
Great
you...
questions, by the way. I'm so happy to have them.
Oh, excellent, excellent. How do you measure stability?
How do we measure stability? Well, stability, you can measure it in two ways, and I think that one of the most important things is time. You have to consider how many days a person is stable, you know? Stable meaning not moving from one side of the coin to the other one, you know? You have to see that the patient remains stable regarding the mood. The more days that it's in the same mood, the more stable he is. Another thing that is so relevant to measure stability is the hours of sleep. For me, that's the gold standard to measure a biological, let's say, a marker, you know? If you measure the stable hours of sleep and you say that the patient is sleeping in a regular pattern, 7 to 8, 9 hours of daily sleep, you can see that the patient is stable. When the patient begins to need less hours of sleep, then you're talking of an unstable patient. So I say that the sleep pattern is probably the best way to measure stability in a fast way.
Excellent, thank you.
Do you have another one?
Yes, one last question. One of your charts showed that bipolar 1 patients spend approximately 52% of their life without symptoms. Is that when they are taking medication properly, or is that without medication?
Absolutely taking medication properly. That's the answer. Yeah. Otherwise, is less, and those graphs. You can view them two sides. You know, because for one side you say, oh God, if I'm taking the medication, I'm going to be the half of my life without any symptoms, which is a good news and bad news. I was telling you that even though you may take the medications, you may experience some symptoms. But what makes the difference between medications or not is the degree of the symptoms. Because I want to give you that as a positive message. Even though you may experience some depressive symptoms, if you're on the medication, there's no way you're going to feel the same that if you were without the medication, because the medication is actually working, and you have to see the medication as a belt, like a safe belt that is going to help you not to move a lot with the bumpiness that the disorder has. So I have to tell you that the prognosis for both, for bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, if the patient is with medication, is very good. The intensity of the symptoms is what actually changes if you're taking medication or not.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering all those questions and providing an excellent webinar today. Many thanks have also come through on our question and answer section. So again, I want to remind everyone that all of our webinars are recorded and archived on our website for future use. And again, thank you, Dr. Sanchez de Carmona, for presenting today for us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Debbie. And I want to thank you, IDPF, and congratulate you for all the work that you're doing. And you have my full support as president of the ISBD to keep on working with you, and I'm very happy to continue helping with whatever you need.
Great. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.